I had to put out this pretty urgent message today because some things have happened in the last 24 hours. We certainly need to take a notice and take a look at this because we are heading into a solar maximum. We've talked about that before, but now astronomers are saying, the experts in the field are saying that it's not going to be next year. It very well could be this year. And if we get hit by coronal mass ejection, which is very likely, it could be nothing short of catastrophic. Now, to understand it real quick, I'm going to get into some little details, but I'm going to go through and explain how important this is and what we've been seeing the last few days, especially in the last 24 hours, is huge. The sun goes through what is called solar cycles, and they happen every 11 years, in which the amount of sunspots and solar activity and coronal mass ejections increase. That's a solar maximum, then it decreases to a solar minimum, then increases, then decreases, and that's all in a process of basically 11 years. And they're looking at summer of 2025, practically speaking, but now they're looking at this year, and when we see the last week of things happening, it's crazy. But now people are getting confused between what's called a solar maximum, which is happening this year, next year, and what's called a grand solar minimum, because when we see the amount of sunspot activity, we're actually seeing a decrease in the peak of the maximums. In other words, when we do have a lot of sunspot activity, that's a solar maximum, but the solar maximums have not been so maximum over time. Let me show you on this graph. So this is a really simple understanding of why we think we're heading into a grand solar minimum, because around 80, 81, we had a solar maximum, then we had a solar minimum, and then around 1991, etc., a solar maximum, not as high as the last one, then a solar minimum, then another solar maximum around 2001, 2002, not as high as the last ones, and another solar minimum, and then 2014, a solar maximum. And basically, if you see the progression, the peaks of the solar maximums, it is decreasing. So looking at these last 4 years, they made an assumption that, oh, you know what, this year is going to be a solar maximum again, but we're seeing a grand solar minimum, and therefore it's not going to be as bad. But that's what they thought. But if we take a look, going back years and years and years, there's always been these fluctuations. And sure enough, this is the part they looked at right here. But just because it went down here doesn't mean the next year is not going to be high. And that's the moral of the story. And we have to prepare for this. We have to be ready, because this solar maximum, as it turns out, it's actually a lot higher than we thought it was going to be. And the amount of activity we've had in the past week, in the past 24 hours, is huge. From physics.org, solar maximum is coming. But now the sun has just released 3 X-class flares. Pay attention to this. This was 17 hours ago. And over a 24-hour period, May 5th and 6th, the sun released 3 solar flares, all X-class, X1.3, 1.2, which are the smallest, and X4.5. And this is important to look at too. Solar flares can impact radio communications, electrical power grids, and of course mess with spacecraft, astronauts in space, and satellites. So when we see these solar flares hitting, and as they're getting bigger and bigger, X4.5, that's a pretty good size flare, but it's nothing compared to like an X10 or X20, or even we saw with the Carrington event in X40. Those are catastrophic size ones. But, we're talking about the grid going down. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to have a video coming out that says the first 72 hours, what's going to happen during the first 3 days of an EMP or a coronal mass ejection. Their effects are practically the same, except the coronal mass ejection can actually be far worse than an EMP even. So whatever you see for that video, now simply erase EMP and put CME on there, and that very well could happen, because the Carrington event caused major problems. But now we're such a technological race of people on the planet, all that technology will come to a screeching halt if we're hit by a huge X-class flare. We're barely into the solar maximum, and we're already seeing multiple of these in a row. And now from Science Tech Daily, a solar fury unleashed, twin X-class flares light up the sky. This did come out today. And when they talk about the 2 intense solar flares, they're talking about one on May 7th and one on May 8th. So we're seeing multiple flares last week, multiple flares in the last 2 days. But guess what? Another X-class flare, not even in the news yet, practically speaking, this morning in the early hours. So they're really starting to put out, and their intensity is growing. So this is a website called spaceweatherlive.com. It shows the last 72 hours of the sun activity. Whenever you see a peak like this, that's a M4.3, which is not that huge. An M4.2, coming up even more, an M8, an X1, so there's an X-class flare. There's an X-class flare. And they keep coming up. Here's the twin X-class flares. And now, look at this. Here's the one early this morning, an X2.25. But same thing, look at the trend. We're seeing it as an increase. The next few days will really tell the tale if we're going to see even some major ones. Notice in red up here, X10, this is where we're starting to get into the danger zone if they start getting up there. Because an X-class flare size 10, an X10 is actually 10 times that of X1. It's not a matter of just a scale. It gets exponentially larger and larger and more powerful. And that's what we're looking at. So this is obviously a little information on how X-class flares work, how solar flares work. We're heading into a major solar maximum, it looks like anyway, and we have to be ready. Again, tomorrow's video will talk about what we're going to be looking for and how catastrophic it is. But either way, if you don't have like a Faraday cage now, have some of your vital equipment, like especially a solar generator, have it for your Faraday cage. I'll link a video after this one of how I built some solar Faraday cages, like for your solar generators and computers and stuff. Because you know what? If one of these does hit, having your electronics fry is really, in reality, just a small part of the bigger picture of how catastrophic it's going to be. A lot of electronics, your cell phone's not going to be very useful for you anyway. But the things that will take place because of that, and that's why I implore you, make sure you stay with tomorrow's video too, and we're going to show the consequences of this. But what I do always on this channel for Goshen Prepping, it's about preparing and be ready. If I see some major X-class flares coming in, I will put a video out, an emergency bulletin if I have to let you know, hey guys, it's time to put stuff in that Faraday cage and be ready because we have a big one heading our way. But that seems to be the direction we're heading, guys. And of course, on Preparedness, Goshen Prepping, that's what we try to do, is be ready for anything. Thanks for watching.